Welcome to the Acronis Facebook Live special broadcast in honor of World Backup Day. We're going to start in just a couple of minutes, give a little bit of time for stragglers to show up. It's worth noting that here at Acronis's U.S. operational headquarters in the Boston area, World Backup Day is kind of a big deal. I was walking in the office this morning, and one of my colleagues was staggering in with a giant sheet cake decorated with Acronis graphics for World Backup Day, and slices of that are flying out of the company cafeteria right now. We tend to think of it here like a combination of New Year's, Mardi Gras, the 4th of July, and Thanksgiving. Our CEO is fond of talking about how your digital life, all the data that you create, is an essential element, like air or shelter or food. Just like you wouldn't fail to pay your rent to keep a roof over your head, World Backup Day is a kind of a useful reminder that you need to take care of your digital life as well. I had a couple of questions for the assembling crowd here. Wondered you could actually answer via the Facebook Live page. But for instance, who knows what the 3-2-1 rule of backup is? That's a question we'll answer a little bit later, but if you have an idea, show off your expertise by typing it into the Facebook Live page comments. All right, folks, I think it's about time for us to get started. Welcome again to the Acronis special Facebook Live broadcast on World Backup Day. We've got a jam-packed half hour for you here with a very special guest that I'm going to introduce in a minute. My name is James Slaby. I'm the Director of Cyber Protection here. I've spent most of my career split between covering security as a researcher and industry analyst at firms like Forrester Research, Yankee Group, and HFS. And the other half I've spent on the product side of various tech security vendors. But here I focus on the convergence of data protection and cybersecurity, what we call cyber protection here at Acronis. If you're not familiar with Acronis, we're one of the leading cyber protection vendors worldwide, dual headquarters in Singapore and in Switzerland. 500,000 business customers, 5 million consumer customers, sold through a network of 50,000 partners, both traditional software resellers and service providers who use Acronis technology to offer as-a-service versions of data protection, so backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service. 1,000 employees, about half of them engineers. And we like to talk about our products and our services in the context of the acronym SAPAS. That's SAPAS, which stands for security, accessibility, privacy, authenticity, and security. Did I get that right? Yeah, I think I did. So when we talk about safety, it's about having multiple copies of your data so that you always have a backup to restore from. Accessibility, the ability to get at your data wherever you are. And those two elements of SAPAS are kind of the classic data protection value proposition. At the other end of the acronym is security, which is about protecting it from criminal threats, the bad guys in North Korea who are trying to steal your data or extort money out of you for it, and as well as protecting you against insiders who are inadvertently incompetent or downright malicious. And that's the kind of classic cybersecurity story. To that, we add a couple more attributes. Authenticity, which is about the ability to attest that the data that you stored or backed up has not been tampered with. And privacy, protecting it against access to your data from prying eyes. Sometimes those attributes are in conflict with one another. So for instance, cybersecurity protections and privacy protections sometimes make it more difficult for accessibility. So cyber protection here at Acronis is all about balancing those different vectors of SOPAS. All right. At this point, I would like to introduce our guest, Joseph Steinberg, who an extraordinarily accomplished cyber security professional with over 20 years in the business. He's written everything from cybersecurity for dummies, so everyone needs to start somewhere with that. But he's also wrote the test prep manual for chief information security officers for their certification exam. He holds a passel of security certifications that is quite rare. I compare it to having both a Master of Wine and a Master Sommelier certification. If you're a wine professional, there's only a couple dozen people like that in the world. And in the security space, Joseph is one of those. He's got 150 patent filing citations. Millions of people read his cybersecurity column every week. It started out on Forbes, later on Inc., and now on his own website, which I encourage you to visit. That's josephsteinberg.com. And he's co-founded a couple of tech security firms and been a principal at another one that's now part of Microsoft. We're really, really thrilled to have him here today. I encourage you to use the Facebook Live page to ask questions, which we're going to get to at the end. We'll answer a few of them live and the rest of them on the page. But please welcome Mr. Joseph Steinberg.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning.
Joseph, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more color on your experience in cybersecurity and tell us a little bit about where you see data protection and cybersecurity going.
Sure. I mean, as you said, I've been in the field more than 20 years. And when you think about the cybersecurity field, 20 years is almost like going back to the era of the dinosaurs. We're talking about the beginning of the commercialization of the internet, the time when major banks had one internet security person, right? Go talk to the the internet security guy, as they used to call him. A totally different world than today. But one of the things that's very important for everyone to know is one of the things that's changed over that time is the nature of who's doing the attacking. We're not talking about 1980s war games movies or hackers sitting in their basement and things of that nature today. Those people still exist, but a lot of the crime that goes on online is organized, sophisticated criminals who are not doing it for curiosity. They're doing it to make money. And that's why there is so much risk of things like ransomware and cryptojacking, because the world has changed. The nature of the attackers has changed. We all hear the stories in the news, of nation state attackers. Those are obviously more sophisticated, but organized crime today all over the world is involved in cybercrime. And that creates a lot of risk for the home user, the small business user, and the large enterprise.
Fascinating. So tell me a little bit about what you think about Acronis's take on how data protection and security are increasingly converging into a single discipline.
Well, actually, that's a concept that those of us in the field have been trying to push for many years. So it's really a great thing to be hearing that. And
we're finally coming around to seeing things your way.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the field, we've always been saying, you can't have data protection without security. You can't have data protection if you're not backing up. And the world is starting to recognize that that's absolutely the case. In the end, as you began in your introduction, we have such large digital lives, with whether it's the life of a business or the life of an individual, the life of a family, people's photos, people's records, everything is digitalized. And that stuff needs to be protected the same way that we would have protected things that were on paper in the past, the same things that we would have protected sentimental items in the past, the same way we would protect confidential items in the past. And part of that protection is backup. It's World Backup Day, which is, I think the first time we spoke, I mentioned to you, every day should be World Backup Day, but it's good to have a day to remind everybody. I'm in the field a long time, and I've never seen somebody who made backups that wasn't thankful that they did. At some point, Everybody needs to restore something from a backup because something happens. A hacker attack, hard drive failing, something happens. As you said, inadvertently, or somebody attacked them maliciously. And I've never seen an organization that didn't back up that afterwards didn't ultimately regret not doing it. So I think, today is a great day to remind everyone of the importance of backup. It's really almost item number one in data protection is, don't have only one copy, certainly not on a machine that's connected to an internet full of hackers. So, make sure you're backing up. And then, you got to make sure that those backups are actually usable. One of the things that we talk about, almost in an information security 101 type of situation is backing up data is only valuable if when there's a problem, you can restore from the data. So if you're backing up and all the backups are useless, that doesn't do you any good. And today, because of attacks, and I'm sure we'll discuss them more in detail, like ransomware, you have a problem where many backups that are created are actually corrupted and are not usable. And because hardware changes so fast, many people back up in ways that you can't restore to the new hardware. And so when things go wrong, they find out the hard way that the backups aren't useful. So it's all tied together in one ecosystem. You need to protect the data, you need to have backups, and the backups need to be protected.
Well, here. I've also heard the analogy that backup is the sort of digital equivalent of dental hygiene. It's a chore, but we all know that the consequences of ignoring it in the long term are unpleasant.
The way I've expressed it with several things related to cyber hygiene, and I actually call it that in many articles, and that would involve backup, but it would involve other things, like not clicking on links and things that you shouldn't be doing. And, people literally have written books on them, like Cybersecurity for Dummies. Shameless pitch.
Mention one.
But, the reality is that there's so many basic things that if you do, that the ounce of prevention can be worth many tons of cure. When it comes to ransomware, there is no close second best to having backups. If you have backups and your data got destroyed somehow, you can restore it. If you don't have backups and you're trying to restore from corrupted information, it may be impossible. You may never get the data back, no matter how much money you have. So, that ounce of prevention can be worth many tons of cure in the case of cybersecurity, and backup is clearly one of those areas where that rule holds true.
Words to live by for World Backup Day. That seems like a good point to segue into Acronis' annual survey that we do for World Backup Day. And we've been doing it for a few years, and we tend to ask the same questions year in and year out, so we get some good kind of trend data with it. But this year's survey was 2,200 consumers and businesses all over the world, Americas, Europe, Asia. And we asked folks a lot of questions about what they were doing with their backup. I wanted to share just a few of the key findings that we got out of it. So apparently about 65% of consumers lost data in the past year, and that's up nearly 30% from the prior survey. Meanwhile, 92+% of users are actually backing up, and that's up something like 24%. So it kind of seems a little paradoxical. How is it that more people are suffering data losses while more people are backing up at the same time? And the answer, of course, is there that it's about more devices. The number of devices per household is up over 3. That's up significantly over time. And accessing data from more places. So there's more opportunities to get exposed to badness like ransomware, or to lose devices, leave your phone in an Uber somewhere. And so the combination of those two things mean that in spite of better backups, more diligent backups, folks are still suffering some very significant losses here.
Yeah, I think one important point is a lot of people who back up, and this is true mostly on the consumer end and on the small business end, do not back up enough. You need to back up enough that if you had to restore from your backups, you wouldn't be in a panic. So, for example, if you have a small business that backs up once a week, but if it lost a week's worth of data, could go out of business, that's not backing up. because again, it's about restoration. If you had to restore, if everything got lost and all you had were the backups, where would you be? So if the answer is, okay, you'd lose an hour worth of work and, that's a loss that's not a problem to incur, or, you lose 1 hour of sales and your business can handle that. All right, then then that's okay. But if you're going to lose, a day, and a day would put you out of business, or a day means you're not going to submit a paper in school on time, or you lose a day's worth of compensation because you're a self-employed person consulting to a business, then maybe that's not okay. And you need to have something that's, actively backing up all the time, or, running backups, incremental backups every hour. There's many different backup strategies, but one of the problems is people just don't do it enough.
The golden rule about setting your recovery point objective to match your business requirements or what you can afford to lose as a consumer.
Right, exactly. Many times people turn on the backup software and decide how often to back up based on the software instead of basing that decision on their needs, their business needs, their personal needs. And that's really how the decision should be made.
I thought there were some interesting stats in here about the differences between how consumers back up versus businesses. So for instance, about 2/3 of users back up to a local drive, either a partition in their machine or an external, like a USB type of drive. And only 1/3 are backing up to the cloud or a combination of the cloud and local storage. Whereas businesses are backing up much more to the cloud. Something like half of the businesses that we surveyed are using the cloud, and another 30% are using a combination of cloud and local storage for backup. So I think it attests to the fact that businesses understand the value of cloud backups, for a kind of redundancy, or should something happen to your local site, if your data center goes up in a fire or a flood, God forbid, local backups stored there aren't going to help you recover from that. And cloud backups are important. It also, cloud enables the ability to recover to other locations and access that data from anywhere as well. So that's something that we think businesses are a little bit ahead of our consumer customers on.
Yeah, and that's actually a very important point. What you do with the backups, physically do with them, is very important. If you back up, even every hour, and you leave it all in one place, and that place has a disaster, a natural disaster, a fire, something happens, you can't access it, you don't have backups, because they're all, you put all the eggs in one basket, and that basket got dumped. And that's why businesses are doing things like going to the cloud. So if people are using local backups, they need to make sure that they're, on a hard drive. They need to make sure that they have at least one of those hard drives on a regular basis moved to some other location. The other issue that brings up, and you brought up in actually an excellent way, is, this backing up to a hard drive connected to their machine, is the issue of ransomware. If you get ransomware on a computer, and I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with it, ransomware is malware. It's stuff written by bad people trying to do damage and steal your money that encrypts your files so that you cannot access them, or in some cases actually steals the files, and then demands a ransom in order to release them back to you. And those ransoms can range from a few $100s to ransoms we've seen in the hundreds of thousands of dollars when they target businesses. So, if your backup is connected to the same computer because you're backing up to an external hard drive and you do not have anti-ransomware protection somewhere, and you get infected with ransomware, it's going to infect and corrupt not only your primary files, but potentially all the backups on the hard drive. So it goes back to the original problem that we stated. If your goal is to restore and you can't restore from the backups because some criminal has encrypted them, they're worthless. So it's very important, if you are backing up to an external hard drive, the advice that we have given for many years is to make sure you disconnect it after every use. The reality is that most people won't do that. So make sure you also have security software involved in the process, protecting those backups from ransomware going in and modifying the files within them.
Yeah, I feel compelled as a sponsor here to point out that Acronis, both in our business product, Acronis Backup, and our consumer product, Acronis True Image, has a capability called Active Protection, which comes with the product and in fact detects terminates and repairs the damage from ransomware attacks. So since we introduced it almost 3 years ago now, we've stopped over 500,000 ransomware attacks, and that's one of kind of our big competitive advantages in the cyber protection space.
But I think it's also important for people to understand that you will be exposed to ransomware. These aren't like theoretical things that, you know, hit people rarely. There's so many criminals using so many variants of this out there. And, you know, with the era of the internet, to distribute 1 million copies, you know, in email costs nothing. It happens in seconds. You're going to be exposed to it. The question is whether your technology will fend it off or it's going to do damage to you. So you must have security software in place. And if you are using backups connected to your computer, that's not just for the computer, that's for the backups as well. You must protect against these things. This is not a if. Ransomware attack on your data or an attempted ransomware attack is a when. And in fact, if you're running security software, you probably don't even realize how often it's protecting you against these things because they happen all the time.
Joseph, you and I read all the big security research reports, and most of the ones that have come out earlier this year point to 2 malware threats as the most pervasive of the past year or so. Ransomware, which you alluded to or spent some time explaining, and also cryptojacking, which kind of seemed to come out of nowhere about a year ago, and it suddenly is either number 1 or number 2 as the most pressing malware threat for businesses and consumers. I wonder if you could tell our audience a little bit about what cryptojacking is.
Sure, and this is a trend that was predicted by some in the industry, myself included, and I still predict it's going to get a lot worse for a very simple reason. Cryptojacking and ransomware are 2 of the easiest ways criminals can make money, real money, quickly by hacking. If you try to hack a bank and steal money from someone's checking account, banks have anti-fraud technology, they have defenses, they have armies of security people, they've got the FBI on speed dial, they can reverse transactions, and you have to take the money out somewhere, which means there's potential of getting caught at that location. There's all sorts of major risks. What ransomware and cryptojacking have given criminals is the ability to make money quickly and easy and with almost no chance of being tracked. Ransomware, as we said, encrypts data, demands a ransom, paid always these days in cryptocurrency, so it's essentially untrackable to the person who's doing it, and redeemable for cash basically anywhere, so they can be anywhere in the world and do this in a matter of, if it's Bitcoin, in a couple hours they're out of it, and other cryptos they could be out in seconds. So very, very fast cash out. One of the trends with ransomware that's important to understand in terms of cryptojacking also is that now we have criminals who are so bad that after they get the ransom, they won't even release your data. They just take the money and run. So you could still lose your data with ransomware, even if you did pay the ransom, which
we've had customers who talked about paying the ransom and then discovering that the decryption code was implemented so badly that it didn't work. So
Correct.
They paid the money and they still couldn't get their data.
Correct. There was a major attack a couple of years ago that spread like wildfire, and that was one of the problems. The encryption was better than the decryption. So whether the criminal intended that to happen or just didn't care, it didn't matter. They made their money.
Pay for the key and it breaks in the lock. It's very frustrating.
These are criminals, right? So there used to be a criminal's code of ethics. Now there isn't. The cryptojacking is actually something that's been growing and is a quicker way to make money for criminals. It's usually on the lower end, but it's easy to do. It makes money faster. And what that is stealing the processing power on people's computers to mine cryptocurrency. The way that digital money, cryptocurrency, is created today involves a lot of computer processing power. So, if you wanted to mine cryptocurrency, let's just take Bitcoin because that's what people are familiar with. You need a lot of computer power, which uses a lot of electricity and is very expensive to do. But if you're a criminal and you take over 1 million people's computers and you use their processing power in the background while they're using the computers, slowing down their computers, stealing their CPU's power, and you combine 1 million stolen machines, you can create Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, and it costs you nothing. It's stolen power. So criminals are doing that. And one of the reasons they like that even more than ransomware, certainly on the non-targeted attacks, the ones that are widespread, is you don't have to have that extra step of the user paying the ransom. The second that they're infected, you're already starting to mine and create cryptocurrency and make money. Many people get infected, don't even know it, so the thing can be operating for a very long period of time. So what we're seeing trend-wise is among, for lack of a better word, less sophisticated criminals, there's a big trend toward crypto mining, but the criminals who are targeting attacks and are looking for much bigger payouts are using ransomware. That said, the creators of ransomware, I mean, this is all, a criminal enterprise, have also tried to make it less expensive to run a ransomware attack. So they now rent out ransomware as a service. Literally, you can rent ransomware online, use it as a service, almost like a cloud provider, at a very low cost. So that's brought back some of the lower end hackers and cyber criminals into the ransomware space, because now they can rent it. They don't have to create the technology. They don't have to be very sophisticated. And essentially, they're paying a few cents on the dollar for operating these attacks. So these attacks are going to continue to proliferate. They make criminals so much money. Much money. I mean, we see attacks where we hear reports of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars made on individual attacks. There were some attacks that were estimated to have made, potentially in the billions of dollars for criminal enterprises. So why would they stop? So these problems are going to get worse, which is exactly why you need to defend. It's not a question of if you're going to get exposed to criminals trying to target you with these things. It's a question of when and how often and how well you defend.
I describe the business model as like Salesforce.com, but evil.
Yeah, and at least as sophisticated. What some people don't realize is that these aren't, individual kids in a basement coding things like you might see in a classic hacker movie from 30 years ago. These are criminal enterprises. They have teams of developers. They are syndicates. These are very organized, very sophisticated groups creating very sophisticated malware. Sometimes these malware are, so sophisticated that they're getting into major companies. There have been major operations hit with ransomware that have had, serious problems as a result, huge losses. So this is real. This is not a theoretical threat or, some paranoia. This is causing real damage. I mean, there was a story this week even of a major company that got hit with ransomware, and it did tens of millions of dollars in damage already.
This is great stuff, Joseph. I wondered if we could spend a little bit of time giving our users some advice about what they can do to protect their digital lives. I like to brag about how Acronis Backup and Acronis True Image with Active Protection uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to stop ransomware attacks. And then last year, we also added the ability to detect and stop cryptojacking attacks. But can you give us a few pointers on sort of basic hygiene for your digital life?
Sure. And just to be upfront, when we talk about cyber hygiene, these are topics that could be expanded, as I said, into books and things like that. So don't think that these little tips are going to, protect you 100% because you heard a few quick tips. But these are the general concepts. Number one,
cybersecurity for dummies, available on Amazon.
Exactly. And everyone really needs to understand these things the same way that we taught our kids, don't run in the street or don't play with fire. In today's world, these are the kinds of things that protect people against many major threats that simply didn't exist before. When it comes to cyber hygiene, essentially, you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself against bad behavior that comes from people. A lot of attacks spread through people making human mistakes. So someone sends you an email with some interesting attachment and you open it, or a link that goes somewhere. So one of the things we say is, don't trust email messages. If something comes in and says, I'm your bank, you need to reset your password, take your ATM card, look at the phone number on the back and call them. Don't just start taking inbound communications as trusting them. By the way, same thing with your phone. If someone calls you and says, I'm your bank, I need your password, you're not going to give it to them. Don't trust email more than you would trust that. If I walked up to you in the street and asked you your password, you would give it to me. An email coming from someone or a phone call is no different. You should be encrypting your data, and that's both data at rest on the computer. So if you have sensitive information, there are so many free ways to encrypt it. but you don't want to store it in a list of passwords, for example, in a text file with no encryption, because if something does go wrong on the computer, encryption can make all the difference between a criminal having the information, quickly or not, and you maybe having potential time to reset things, etc. If you're not sure if something should be encrypted, the rule is it should be. That's almost always the case. By the way, the same thing with backup. If you're not sure if you're backing up often enough, almost always you're not, because it means you're not sure if the recovery time would be, quick enough, or that would be up to date enough. And if you're not sure, that's not good. So to sleep better at night, make sure you're doing those kinds of things. You want to run security software on all computers, on your phone today. Your phone is a computer, right? We call it a smartphone, but if you look at the device, it's a smartphone the same way that a Ferrari is a fast horseless carriage. It's true, but it doesn't really get to the essence of the fact that your phone has more computing power than we had to put a man on the moon. Your phone has more computing power than entire networks from the 1980s of computers. So this is a real computer. It's always connected to the internet. It's got sensitive information on it. You got to be protecting it with security software. In general, we also recommend for mobile devices to have a mobile wipe capability. So if your laptop or phone were stolen, you could remotely wipe it from somewhere else, either by calling a service at a company or by going online. I think Google has this now built into every Android phone through Google. These are good capabilities. And remember, that's also tied to the backup. Like you asked me before about the connection, backups and security. It's all connected, data protection and security. If you wipe your phone and it turns out you have it, you better have a backup because you just wiped it, right? So, and if you don't have it, obviously you need a backup as well. So part of protection is to make sure you've got multiple copies of the data. You should have a lot more data in backups than you should have in the primary, because you should be backing up multiple times.
Well, we're about half an hour in here, Joseph. I wanted to get to some of the users' questions, starting with, how does Acronis use blockchain in their solutions? I think I'll take this one.
Sure.
This is, again, one of the innovations that Acronis has pioneered in the market, is bringing the advantages of blockchain into the cyber protection world. And the way that we use blockchain is to support that authenticity element of our SOPAS proposition, which is the ability to attest that your data has not been tampered with after you've stored it or backed it up to some particular location. And the way that we do that is that when you archive files or back them up, we will take a hash of that, either that backup archive or that storage archive, store it in the blockchain, which is an online public distributed ledger that is immutable thanks to the use of clever cryptographic math. And when it comes time to recall that data, either to restore a backup or to recall data stored in, say, Acronis Cyber Cloud for storage purposes, that we can take another hash, compare it with the immutable hash that's stored in the blockchain, and if they match, then we can effectively prove that your data has not been tampered with. That's a unique capability. It's available. We make it available as infrastructure for our service providers to offer it as a service. So if you read about Acronis Notary, that's basically our blockchain data authentication capability offered as a service. All right, another question here.
And by the way, the only thing worse than having a backup, not having a backup, is having a corrupted backup. Because if somebody did tamper with the data and you don't know it, and you restore from there, you could have absolute disasters, both from a personal perspective and a business perspective. I have seen cases where people restored from a backup. The backup had malware in it. So they cleaned off an attack from their network. And then after cleaning it off, when they did the restore, they just put the attack right back on.
The cure worse than the malady.
That's correct. Well, the wrong cure is worse than the malady.
So one from the Facebook audience. Joseph, for you, what's the worst kind of ransomware, and what can we do to avoid it?
Well, what's worse? I mean, if you lost all your data today, I think it wouldn't matter which ransomware variant did it. You'd consider that one to be the worst. The reality is that ransomware has gotten a lot more sophisticated technologically, and essentially we've gone from an era where ransomware could encrypt a couple of files and then use those to prove that it could damage the rest, to really rendering entire file systems unusable. There was one variant of ransomware within the last few years, for example, that encrypted the file allocation tables. Essentially, it made it that within seconds of the malware running, every file on the disk was still there, but there was no way to access it because your operating system couldn't find it. So we've seen the malware get more sophisticated. One problem with ransomware specifically is that criminals have made it easier to infect computers. That's one area where they've worked on. So instead of requiring you to click on something, they now have variants of ransomware that spread by exploiting vulnerabilities. In some cases, these are actually vulnerabilities that may have been discovered by intelligence agencies around the world, and then criminals discovered or leaked or stole somehow.
And that's how the big WannaCry ransomware outbreak spread around the world. The
correct
blue exploit.
Correct. And some of the NotPetya, which may not even be considered ransomware because in some cases it was destroying the data, not ransoming it. But there's been several variants in the last few years that specifically can attack computers with the user not doing anything. It's vulnerabilities. It's the human error of the programming of software on the computer of the operating systems. And what that means is if you did not have security software, you could be infected even if you didn't do anything wrong. Literally, you could turn on your computer and potentially get infected, or you go to a website and potentially get infected. There were just so many different ways, and so the sophistication of the technology is getting better. And then the other thing that's getting better is that you're starting to see more and more versions of malware in general, but also of ransomware specifically, and of cryptojackers, where the malware is written in ways that it can hide itself better from anti-malware technology. Which, it's a spy versus spy game of the security companies.
Always an arms race.
It's an arms race, but at the same time, it highlights the reason for backing up and ensuring the backups are able to be used for restoration, because there is a possibility that you'll do everything right and you're still going to need to restore from a backup because something could still go wrong. Obviously, if you're doing things right and using security software, your odds are much, much better, like many orders of magnitude better than someone who's not, but it's never 100%. So you always want to make the backups. And I will tell you that the most secure environments that I've been in are actually the ones that seem to do the most backups, which is kind of an interesting thing, because they're the ones who are least likely to need it. They've got redundancy, they've got everything in place. But the way they look at it is, if you're doing everything right, you want to do everything right, and that means that if something goes wrong, we want to lose nothing.
Fascinating stuff. All right, I've got an interesting question here. I think this is a good one for you, Joseph. Do you know if there were cases when ransomware criminals were actually caught and got sent to prison? How do law enforcement authorities deal with ransomware criminals?
So there are criminals who have put out malware, who have gotten caught, and who have, been prosecuted and gone to prison. The problem is, and I'm a blunt New Yorker, so I'll say it that way: cybercrime pays. When you look at the type of crimes that are out there, the type of crimes that are most successful and least likely to get caught are almost all cyber. The people writing these things are usually not in the United States. They're distributing them from all sorts of other countries where law enforcement may be bribable, where things aren't necessarily as just as in the United States. For all our problems, we still have a generally very just system, certainly compared with many other parts of the world. And sometimes there's, as we sometimes say, sometimes the people in law enforcement may be the siblings of the people operating the crime syndicates, or they may be the same people. So, part of the problem is that these aren't, it's not like the FBI can go and it's somebody sitting, in Washington, D.C. writing this malware. It's a very sophisticated international, syndicate typically that's involved in creating, distributing, etc. And law enforcement has limited resources. So they do try to target these parties and they do catch them, but it's a very small percentage of the criminals actually doing this, which is why criminals are willing to take the risk of doing it. Remember, they're getting paid in cryptocurrency, which essentially means they can be sitting anywhere and cash out anywhere. Even, they could collect the money in the United States and cash it out in Eastern Europe while sitting in Asia, right? And move it around, untraceable. So, they do catch them, but it's a very, very small percentage. And by the way, that's why when they do catch these criminals, law enforcement make a big deal out of it, because they want criminals to know that there is a risk of getting caught.
A useful reminder to take care of your digital life in celebration of World Backup Day. All right, I think we've got to stop with the questions there. We will follow up with any questions that were posted to the Facebook Live page that we didn't get to in this session. Just to wrap it up here, Joseph, can you tell our audience where they can find you online?
Easiest way is josephsteinberg.com, josephsteinberg.com. I'm on social media, on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. It's at Joseph Steinberg. So, relatively simple, and they're all linked from my website.
Great stuff. Yeah, I'm at JR Slaby, SLABY, if you want to follow me on Twitter. I spend most of my time on social media talking about cyber protection topics. So a quick wrap up. I wanted to encourage you to Google Acronis World Backup Day. We've got a landing page there that recaps a lot of the survey results that I just highlighted here today. We've also got a promotion running there that if you're in the market for a consumer or business backup product, you can get a discount. So that's how we're helping you celebrate World Backup Day. You can also find some useful content on the Acronis blog and the Acronis Resource Center. We've provided tons of free information to help you understand the issues that you need to worry about, how to deal with your cyber protection issues. If you're interested in actually trying our products, Google Acronis True Image Trial or Acronis Backup Trial, and that'll take you to a page where you can download a fully functional version of our products that you can play with for 30 days and help you decide if that's right for you. One last commercial for the upcoming Acronis Global Cyber Summit. It's our first annual security-oriented event. We're holding it in beautiful Miami Beach in October. Not a bad destination. We've got some cool keynote speakers lined up, like Robert Herjavec, for the security entrepreneur who's on Shark Tank. Eric O'Neill, an old friend of ours, former FBI terrorism counterintelligence agent who brought down kind of the biggest traitor to American intelligence ever, and is now an independent and a great speaker. And Graham Hackland, who's one of Acronis's technology partners. He runs the technology shop for the Williams Formula One racing team, and what they're doing in the cyber protection world is really fascinating. Anyway, so go Google Acronis Global Cyber Summit if that interests you. I wanted to say thanks again so much, Joseph Steinberg, for taking the time to participating here. Your insights are really fascinating. I encourage the audience to go read your column every week. It's great stuff. Thanks once again to our audience for taking the time out of your busy schedules to spend a little time with us. Hope you have a great World's Backup Day. Take care of your digital life, and we'll see you again soon.